Okay, welcome to part 2 of our little adventure here. So far, what we've done really doesn't do a lot of good. It's just a regular static program. Well, that's fine. I mean, we did learn one thing about classes, how to instantiate an object without dragging and dropping it onto a form interface. And the reason we did that is because you can't do that when you're talking about class objects, because they're really just source files. So there's nowhere to drag and drop them, so you need to know how to do that. And we talked about that already, how that works right here. Okay. So let's look at the rationale behind what we're kind of doing here. We want to create a class from this initial exercise that will manage the state of a form. And I've already sort of talked about that, but just to reiterate things, I want to be able to set the state of controls on a given form. Now, let's just say I had 5 forms, including the startup form main object, and each one of those forms is going to have different numbers of labels and text boxes and buttons and so forth. So there's no way to hard code, as we did here, anything regarding setting color or fonts and all that. There's just no way to do it because they're going to be different. You can't. It's convoluted to try to do it differently. So towards that end, we need to figure out some way of determining what control is what and how to and setting the properties for that control. Now, something you probably didn't realize, or maybe you did, but if you didn't, I'm going to tell you. Every form, in fact, the entire project has what's called a control collection, or an objects collection. So every control object on a form is stored in a collection, something like an array, a data collection. You can iterate or loop through that collection looking for specific types of controls. Not only that, but you can also examine their names if you wanted to. There are a lot of different properties and so forth. So that having been said, what we want to be able to do is, rather than statically say, okay, label string 1.4 color equals my color, label string 2 4 color, we want to be able to loop through no matter how many labels there are, assuming that we want to do all the labels, and that's the rationale for this little learning exercise, and change their color. Same thing with the font. Well, let's just start off by saying I'm going to create a couple of sub-procedures here, which you should know how to do, that will enable us to do that. And then we'll examine how we're going to do that. So I got public, sub, and I'll call this set label back color. And it's going to take one argument. I'll call it my color as type color. Okay, so that got that. And then we'll come down here and do another one of type of access specifier public sub set label font. And again, we'll have my font as font. All right, let's save this. So what we have here is just not going to work, is it? No, it's not going to work. So I'm going to comment this out just temporarily. Not if you want it to be dynamic, and you want it to work for other forms, and you want it to work in other programs, which is the whole point of object-oriented design, isn't it? All right. So how are we going to do that? Well, not only are there color objects and font objects, but there are control objects as well. And there are label objects. Everything's an object, right? Control is just a generic control object. So I need to go ahead and create an object, and I'm going to call it C control as control. Control. And we can set that equal to, what do we say, nothing. Always initialize it to something or nothing in this case, as the case may be. All right, we talked about different kinds of loops, right? I'm going to use a for each loop. because these are really easy to use for looping through a control. For each, if you don't know how to do this, you might want to look it up. C control, so in other words, for each one of these that I've created, control object, in a collection of controls. Now, the collection of controls I want to look at are the form collection, and the name of the form that is currently in focus, which is the one that this code resides in, is me.controls. I want to look at all the controls, and I can't type or spell, in the control in the form. All right, so for every one of these controls in this controls collection, I'm going to loop through each one of them from beginning to end, however that happens to work out. We don't have to know how many there are or anything if we use the for each loop. Now, here's the deal. Not everything has a color property, and you don't want to set the color of everything on the form anyway. You just want labels. All right, and now here's where we're going to learn something new. If the type of is an operator, keyword, C control, that's my current object. Y'all send me some help so you can teach me how to spell control. If the type of C control, so in other words, it's going to assign my control whatever type of control it's looking at through this entire collection. So it starts off at the first control in the collection, second control in the collection, and what for each does is assign that to my control so that I can look at each one and not have to try to find an array or index, because we don't want to go through all that. You can do that, but there's no need in it. If the type of control that's currently assigned to my little C control object here from the controls collection is what? Is of type label, which is what we're looking at here, right? Label. And we're going to set them all, so we don't really care which one it is. Then, and we want to iterate through the controls collection. All right, if that's true, then what do we want to do? We want to set the for color. Now, the reason you want to do this is, first of all, you only want labels. Second of all, not every object on here has a color property, and if you try to assign the color to something that to an object that doesn't have a color property, you got an error, big problem. So we don't want to worry about that. For color is what we're setting. So we're just going to go ahead and assign it to what we passed in right here, my color. All right. Now we're going to do the same thing for the fonts of a label, so we can actually, dadgummit, undo. I almost said a dirty word or two or three. Choice expletives, the mark of a programmer. I almost said a good or bad one, and it's not necessarily either one. My font, C control is control, C control and me controls type label. This would be font, right? Okay. I'm going to save this puppy and cross my fingers and pray. Let's see if this is going to work. Or just at least if it'll compile. It ain't going to work because I haven't called these methods, but yeah, it looks like it's, woo. Didn't mean to do that. It seems to compile okay. Now, instead of setting these here, I'm just going to make a call to the respective sub-procedure passing in what? The color variable that came back from the dialog box. Again, not the only way to do it, but it might work. All right, so the name of this procedure is set label back color, and that should have been set label for color, so let's fix that now because there's a difference, right? All right, so set label for color, not back color. what does it take? It takes a color object, one argument. And that's what we got right here, isn't it? From the dialog box, color picker. Alrighty, so that takes care of that. And then we want to do one for the font. Now I would expect that you're going to need to watch these a couple times, maybe to try to parse my stupidity that I've put into words for you. And we're going to pass in our font object. And my goodness, let's see if that works for us. Okay, so we have our two custom user sub-procedures which loop through the controls collection of this form, setting only the color and font for the label objects. Otherwise, if it's not of type label, it ignores it. All right? Okay, you need this because there's no way to know what to set when we encapsulate this into our class object. So let's save it and run it and see if it functions. All right, click that. That seems to work. And bold 14 strike through. That seems to work. Well, we got a problem here because it's not picking up what we had selected before. What should have happened is strike through should have been checked, bold should have been checked 14. We need to set these dialog of these pickers back to whatever was stored before. It was just a minor thing. All right. Before we go any further, we need to fix that. We don't have any form properties here, but we can go ahead for now and use whatever's in the labels. That's the way to go. So let's see if we can't do that real quick. I mean, that's just good form. You're supposed to do that. You're supposed to make sure these things pick up whatever you had set before. Label string 1 dot for color. That should get that. That sets it to whatever we had there before. So, next time I click on that button, it's going to pop up and show the user what's currently there, and then they can change it. It's just good form. Okay, that's all that is. Set to previous selection. Programming is nothing if not about good form. Right? You like that? I just came up with that. I've never heard it before. It probably isn't true. Especially if you knew some of the people I've associated with. Anyway, enough about me. All right, this is font and font. Let's see if this is going to work. Whoops. What did I just do? What did I do? Oh, font. I did the same thing again earlier, didn't I? Only I paused it and you didn't see all the harassing and cussing I did. All right. All right, so we're going to do this, and then we're going to do this. I won't change the font, but you could, change it to 14. All right, now let's go to color. It has picked up the color I had selected before, which is what we wanted. And then this, it's picked up all the different pieces and properties of the font. Oblique. See? That's working pretty good. And we put this functionality in here, so we're going to need that later, so we might as well knock it out before we start dealing with class objects. All righty. Moving right along here. Hopefully, you can go back and look and see what we're doing. And, oh my goodness. Okay, well, it was running. I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye.